I never imagined I'd watch my own family turn their backs on me, especially after everything I gave them. I found those pictures of the beach house hidden in my son's drawer, a place bought with money I had painstakingly saved and sent them over years, now theirs to enjoy without a single word to me. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning, I wake up to the same weary light filtering through the faded curtains of my small New York City apartment in Queens. The smell of coffee steams quietly on the rickety table, but my hands tremble too much to hold the cup steady. My routine is a mix of exhaustion and hopeful memories, the faded photograph of my late husband Harold on the mantelpiece, the old kitchen timer that pops with a tired ding, reminding me how little time I have left to make sense of this loneliness. The building creaks around me, old pipes groaning like my joints, and somewhere down the hall, Mrs. Chen's television murmurs through the thin walls. I'm 72 years old, and I live in apartment 4B of a rent-stabilized building that's seen better decades. The wallpaper peels at the corners, and the radiator makes sounds like a dying animal every winter morning. But this place holds 43 years of my life. Harold and I moved here when Michael was just 7, back when Queens felt like the suburbs and we could still afford the American dream on a postal worker's salary and my part-time bookkeeping job. That Tuesday afternoon changed everything. The text message came while I was sorting through my weekly pill organizer, the one with compartments for Monday through Sunday that reminds me how organized my declining years have become. The phone buzzed against the Formica countertop, and I fumbled for my reading glasses, expecting maybe a reminder about my doctor's appointment or a grocery store coupon alert. Instead, I read words that felt like ice water in my veins. Sorry Mom, Christmas dinner is canceled this year. Sarah's family is visiting from California and we just don't have the space. Maybe next time. Maybe next time. I set the phone down with shaking hands and stared at the empty living room where I'd already started imagining Michael and Sarah, maybe the grandchildren I rarely see anymore, gathered around my small dining table. I'd been planning that Christmas dinner for weeks, had already bought the turkey, the cranberry sauce, the special rolls Sarah used to love when she still pretended to care about what I cooked. The silence in my apartment felt different that afternoon. Heavier. Like it was pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. I walked to the window and looked out at the December grayness of Northern Boulevard, watching strangers hurry past under umbrellas, everyone rushing to somewhere that wanted them. That's when I remembered the envelope. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been helping Michael clean out his spare bedroom during one of my rare visits to their house in Westchester. They'd upgraded from their starter home to something with 4 bedrooms and a 3-car garage, and I'd been so proud, so happy that all those years of sending money had helped them build something beautiful. While Sarah was at her yoga class and Michael was on a work call, I'd been organizing boxes, trying to be useful, trying to justify why they'd invited me over. In the bottom drawer of an old desk, tucked behind some forgotten tax documents, I found a manila envelope marked, Beach House, Financing. My heart stopped when I opened it and saw the papers inside. Property deed. Mortgage documents. Bank statements showing the down payment of $85,000, money transferred from my savings account over the course of 18 months. $85,000. My nest egg. My security. My retirement fund that Harold and I had scraped together penny by penny, working overtime and skipping vacations and buying generic groceries for 30 years. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the photographs tucked behind the official documents. Glossy pictures of a beautiful beach house on the Jersey shore, white clapboard siding and blue shutters, a wraparound porch facing the ocean. There were photos of Michael and Sarah sitting on that porch, wine glasses raised in celebration. Photos of my grandchildren Emma and Jake building sandcastles on what was apparently their own private stretch of beach. Photos of Sarah's parents visiting, everyone laughing and relaxed in a paradise I'd unknowingly purchased but was never invited to enjoy. I remember standing in that spare bedroom, holding those photographs, feeling something break inside my chest. Not my heart, that had been breaking slowly for years. Something deeper. Something that felt like the last thread connecting me to the family I'd sacrificed everything to support. The envelope trembled in my arthritic hands as I realized they'd been living this secret life, this beautiful life, while I sat in my cramped Queens apartment, rationing my heating bills and buying store-brand soup, sending them money every time they called with another financial emergency. And they'd never said a word. I slipped the envelope back into the drawer and never mentioned it. What could I say? How do you confront the people you love most when you discover they've been treating you like an ATM instead of a mother and grandmother? But sitting in my apartment that December afternoon, staring at that canceled Christmas text, I couldn't pretend anymore. The truth was crushing me, and I'd been carrying it alone for weeks. I walked to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, the one where I keep important papers and old photographs. Hidden beneath my Medicare cards and Social Security statements was a copy of the beach house deed I'd secretly made when Michael wasn't looking. My name was nowhere on that deed, even though every dollar of the down payment had come from the woman who now couldn't even get invited to Christmas dinner. Do you know what it feels like to discover you're not a family member, but a business transaction? To realize that every "I love you, Mom" came with a price tag attached? I sat on the edge of my bed and cried. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the harsh, ugly sobs of someone who's finally stopped lying to herself. The sound echoed in my small bedroom, bouncing off walls decorated with family photos that suddenly felt like evidence of my own foolishness. How had I let this happen? When did I become so desperate for love that I'd pay any price for scraps of affection? The memories flooded back, each one more painful than the last. It started gradually, the way these things always do. Michael's first apartment after college, when his entry-level job barely covered rent and groceries. "Just a little help getting started, Mom. You know I'm good for it." And I was so proud of him, so eager to help him launch into adulthood, that I didn't hesitate to transfer $500 from our savings. Then came Sarah, sweet and charming, with her designer handbags and expensive taste. Michael called after they'd been dating 6 months, his voice tight with embarrassment. "Sarah's student loans are really high, Mom, and if we could just get ahead of them, we'd be in such a better position to start our life together." $2,000 that time, money Harold and I had been saving for a cruise we never took. The wedding was $12,000 of family contribution. The house down payment was $15,000. The car repairs, the medical bills, the family emergencies that always seemed to happen right before I received my Social Security check, it all added up over the years, a steady stream of my retirement flowing into their increasingly comfortable lifestyle. And what did I get in return? Phone calls that lasted exactly as long as it took them to explain their latest financial crisis. Holiday visits that felt more like obligation than desire. Grandchildren who barely remembered my name because their parents were always too busy to bring them around. But I told myself it was love. I convinced myself that this was what mothers do, sacrifice for their children's happiness and success. Harold warned me, before the cancer took him 5 years ago. "Margaret," he'd whispered from his hospital bed, "don't let them drain you dry when I'm gone. You're going to need that money more than they do." I'd shushed him then, told him not to worry about such things. But Harold had seen what I was too blind to acknowledge, that our son viewed us as a financial resource, not as parents deserving of respect and consideration. The pattern became clear in those terrible minutes sitting on my bed, staring at that beach house deed. Every phone call started with casual conversation. "How's your health, Mom? How's the weather in Queens?" but always ended with some version of, "We're in a tight spot and could really use your help." And like a fool, I always helped. I liquidated certificates of deposit, cashed out savings bonds, even took out a small loan against Harold's life insurance policy. I funded their American dream while living in an apartment where the heat barely works and the elevator breaks down every other week. The worst part wasn't just the money, though $85,000 represented decades of sacrifice and careful planning. The worst part was the deception. The way they'd hidden their beautiful beach house life while accepting my grocery money. The way Sarah would call and complain about being house poor while posting Instagram photos from their ocean view deck. The way Michael would sigh about cash flow problems while planning family vacations I was never invited to join. They'd made me complicit in their lie by accepting my money under false pretenses. Every check I wrote, every bank transfer I authorized, every time I said, "Of course, sweetheart, whatever you need," I was enabling them to see me as nothing more than a convenient source of funding. And the cruelest irony? While I was cutting coupons and buying generic medication to stretch my fixed income, they were building a fortune. The beach house was just one asset in a portfolio that had grown substantial over the years. Michael had invested in the stock market with money I'd sent for emergencies, and Sarah had started a small business with my loan for their medical bills. They'd built wealth while keeping me in financial anxiety, always worried about how I'd manage if my Social Security wasn't enough. The phone rang, jolting me back to the present moment. Michael's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a wild second, I thought maybe he was calling to apologize, to explain, to invite me to see the beach house I'd unknowingly purchased. Instead, his voice carried the familiar tone I'd learned to recognize over the years, the one that meant he needed something. "Hey Mom, hope you're doing well. Listen, Sarah's car needs some repair work, and with the holidays coming up, we're stretched a little thin. Could you help us out with maybe $1,500? We'll pay you back after the new year, you know we're always good for it." We're always good for it. I almost laughed at the absurdity. They'd never paid me back anything, not once in all these years, and we both knew it. The fiction that these were loans rather than gifts had become so embedded in our family dynamic that Michael probably believed it himself. "Michael," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I need to ask you something." "Sure, Mom, what's up?" "But about Sarah's car, The mechanic says if we don't fix the transmission soon, it could cause bigger problems, and you know how expensive, Michael. I interrupted him, something I'd never done in my entire life as his mother. Do you and Sarah own a beach house? The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice careful and measured. Mom, why would you ask that? Because I found the papers, son. I found the deed and the photos and the mortgage documents. I know about the house on the Jersey Shore. I know where my money went. Another silence, this one even longer. When Michael finally responded, his tone had shifted from casual manipulation to defensive anger. Mom, you shouldn't have been going through our personal papers. That was private. Private? The word came out louder than I'd intended, carrying decades of suppressed frustration. Private? Michael, I paid for that house. Every dollar of the down payment came from my savings account. How is it private when it was bought with my money? It wasn't like that, Michael said quickly. You were helping us out during a difficult time, and we used that help to make a good investment. The beach house is actually gaining value, so in a way, your money is working for all of us. Working for all of us? I closed my eyes and tried to control the rage building in my chest. Even caught red-handed, he was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to make their deception sound like financial planning. When were you planning to tell me about this house I helped buy, Michael? When were you going to invite me to see it? When were you going to acknowledge that your 72-year-old mother who lives in a deteriorating apartment in Queens might enjoy spending a weekend at the beach she unknowingly financed? Mom, you're being dramatic. It's not like you were interested in beach houses before. You never even liked going to the shore when I was a kid. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost doubted my own memories. But I remembered those family trips to Jones Beach when Michael was young, how his eyes would light up when we built sandcastles and searched for shells. I remembered teaching him to body surf and buying him hermit crabs from the boardwalk vendors. I remembered how happy we'd been during those simple day trips, when love wasn't measured in dollar signs and family time didn't require a financial transaction. I need to go, Michael. Sarah's car will have to wait. Mom, wait, you don't understand. The repair shop needs a deposit by Friday, and I hung up the phone. For the first time in my adult life, I hung up on my son in the middle of his request for money, and the silence that followed felt both terrifying and liberating. But the silence didn't last long. 20 minutes later, Sarah called, her voice sweet and concerned in a way that immediately put me on guard. Sarah only used that tone when she needed something, and she only called me directly when Michael's approach had failed. Hi, Mom Margaret. How are you feeling today? Michael mentioned you were having a little confusion about some paperwork you found. Confusion. As if my discovery of their deception was a symptom of age-related mental decline rather than evidence of their betrayal. The condescension in her voice made my hands shake with anger. I'm not confused, Sarah. I'm hurt and I'm angry, but I'm not confused. I know exactly what that beach house represents, and I know exactly how it was purchased. Well, yes, you did help us during a challenging financial period, and we're so grateful for that. But I think you might be misunderstanding the situation. The down payment came from several sources, $85,000, Sarah. Every penny from my savings account over 18 months. I have the bank records. Her voice faltered for just a moment before recovering its saccharine sweetness. We were planning to have you visit the house soon, actually. It's just that it's needed so much work, and we wanted to get it fixed up nice before you saw it. You know how you worry about things being perfect. More gaslighting. I was the one who worried about perfection, not the daughter-in-law who'd hidden a beach house from me for over a year while continuing to ask for money. I was the problem, not the people who deceived and financially exploited me. Sarah, I want the keys to the house. What? For the first time, her voice lost its manipulative sweetness and revealed genuine shock. You heard me. I want the keys to the beach house. If my money bought it, I should at least be able to visit it. Shouldn't I? Mom Margaret, that's not. I mean, we have tenants lined up for the winter months, and there are insurance issues, and really, it's not set up for someone your age. The stairs are steep and there's no railing, and, goodbye, Sarah. I hung up on her too, and this time the silence felt different. Not peaceful exactly, but clean. Like I'd finally stopped participating in a conversation that had been making me sick for years. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with text messages. First from Michael, Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this reasonably. Then from Sarah, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you at all. Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should see your doctor. Then from Michael again, you're overreacting about the beach house. We were protecting you from stress by not mentioning it. Protecting me from stress. I stared at that text message and felt something shift inside my chest, like a door closing on a room I'd been trapped in for too long. They weren't protecting me from anything. They were protecting themselves from accountability. I turned off my phone and sat in the growing darkness of my Queens apartment, listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling around me. Mrs. Chen's television through the wall. The Puerto Rican family upstairs putting their children to bed. The traffic on Northern Boulevard carrying people home to places where they were wanted. For the first time in months, I wasn't expecting a phone call asking for money. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning how to stretch my Social Security check to accommodate my children's latest financial crisis. For the first time since Harold died, I was alone with my thoughts without the constant anxiety of wondering when the next request for help would come. And in that silence, I began to understand something painful but necessary. I had trained my family to see me as an ATM by never saying no, never setting boundaries, never demanding the basic respect that should come automatically with being someone's mother and grandmother. I'd been so afraid of losing them that I'd paid them to tolerate me. And now I was learning that their tolerance had been expensive and temporary anyway. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I made my coffee, took my medications, and then did something I'd never done before. I called my bank and asked to speak with someone about financial planning for seniors. The advisor, a kind woman named Jennifer, listened patiently as I explained my situation. I didn't go into the emotional details, but I outlined how much money I'd given my family over the years and how little I had left for my own retirement security. Mrs. Morrison, Jennifer said gently, what you're describing is unfortunately very common. Adult children sometimes develop a pattern of financial dependence that can jeopardize their parents' security. Have you considered setting up some boundaries around your money? Boundaries around my money. The concept felt foreign but intriguing. What do you mean? Well, you could set up automatic transfers into accounts that are harder to access impulsively. You could create a monthly budget that includes a specific amount for family help, so you're not constantly draining your savings. You could even work with a financial counselor to develop strategies for saying no when requests go beyond your means. Saying no. Another foreign concept. I'd been saying yes so reflexively for so many years that I'd forgotten I had a choice. Mrs. Morrison, can I ask you something personal? When you send money to your family, how does it make you feel? I thought about her question carefully. Anxious, I admitted. Every time I transfer money, I worry about how I'll manage if I have an emergency. But I also feel needed, I suppose. Like I'm still useful to them. And how do you feel when they don't call or visit unless they need money? The truth hit me like a physical blow. Used, I whispered. I feel used. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, letting my honesty hang in the air. Mrs. Morrison, healthy families don't require payment for love and attention. If your relationships with your adult children depend on your ability to solve their financial problems, then those aren't really relationships. They're transactions. Transactions. The word echoed in my mind as I walked home from the bank, carrying pamphlets about financial planning and elder financial abuse. The streets of Queens looked different somehow, more vivid and three-dimensional, as if I'd been seeing everything through a fog that was finally lifting. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping for myself. Not for groceries or household necessities, but for something I wanted. I bought a small television for my bedroom, something I'd been considering for months but had never purchased because I was always worried about having enough money for the next family emergency. The young man at the electronics store helped me load the TV into a cab, chatting easily about his own grandmother who lived in a similar building in the Bronx. She's always telling us not to spend money on her, he laughed, but we surprise her sometimes anyway. Last week my cousin and I pooled our money and got her a new winter coat. She cried when we brought it over. I smiled and tipped him generously, struck by the contrast between his family's casual generosity and my own family's calculated extraction. His grandmother didn't have to buy their love and attention. They gave it freely and looked for ways to give back to her. What had I done wrong? How had I raised a son who saw me as a resource rather than a relationship? The questions tormented me as I spent the evening setting up my new television, trying to focus on the innocent pleasure of watching old movies from the comfort of my own bed. But every few minutes, my phone would buzz with another text from Michael or Sarah, each message a variation on the same theme. I was overreacting, I was being unreasonable, I was causing family drama over nothing. The gaslighting was relentless, and I began to understand why I'd accepted their treatment for so long. It's exhausting to constantly defend your right to basic dignity. It's easier to just give them what they want and pretend everything is fine. But something had changed in me during that conversation with Jennifer at the bank. Maybe it was hearing someone else acknowledge that what was happening to me wasn't normal or acceptable. Maybe it was finally saying out loud that I felt used. Whatever it was, I couldn't unknow what I now knew about my own worth and my family's exploitation. 3 days later, Michael showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was surprised to see him through the peephole. He never visited anymore unless I was sick or there was some emergency that required his presence. He certainly never just dropped by to spend time with me. "Hi, Mom," he said when I opened the door, his voice carrying an awkward cheerfulness that immediately made me suspicious. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing. Michael lived in Westchester County. My Queens neighborhood was not somewhere he'd ever be casually, and we both knew it. This visit had a purpose, and that purpose undoubtedly involved money. Come in, I said, stepping aside to let him into my small living room. He looked around with the same barely concealed distaste I'd noticed during his rare previous visits, taking in my worn furniture and outdated appliances with the expression of someone slumming in poverty. The place looks nice, Mom. Very cozy. Cozy. His euphemism for cramped and outdated. I wondered if he'd ever noticed that while his house had grown larger and more luxurious over the years, my living situation had remained exactly the same. Did he think I chose to live in a deteriorating building with unreliable heat and a broken elevator? Did he think I preferred generic groceries and outdated furniture? Can I get you coffee? I asked, falling back into the maternal instincts that had governed our relationship for 45 years. Sure, that would be great. He sat down on my old sofa, the one Harold and I had bought at a discount furniture store in 1987, and immediately pulled out his phone. Even during this obviously important visit, he couldn't give me his full attention. I made coffee in my ancient percolator, listening to him tap messages and wondering what crisis had brought him to my door. Sarah's car transmission? Another home repair emergency? Maybe one of the children needed something expensive for school. So, Mom, Michael said when I handed him a mug, Sarah and I have been talking about this whole beach house situation, and we think there's been a big misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Not an apology for deceiving me, not an acknowledgement of their financial manipulation, but a misunderstanding that was apparently my fault for misinterpreting their behavior. What kind of misunderstanding, Michael? Well, you seem to think we were hiding the house from you, but that's not what happened at all. We were just waiting for the right time to surprise you with it. The house has been our family's gift to you for all the help you've given us over the years. The lie was so audacious, so smoothly delivered, that for a moment I almost believed him. This was a level of manipulation I'd never experienced before, even from my increasingly manipulative family. He was trying to rewrite history, to transform their deception into a surprise gift. Michael, I said carefully, if the house was a gift for me, why isn't my name on the deed? His confident expression faltered slightly. Well, there were tax implications, and legal complications, and we thought it would be simpler to handle the paperwork ourselves until we could sit down with a lawyer and transfer everything properly. And why wasn't I invited to see this gift? Why did I have to find out about it by accident? We wanted to finish the renovations first. You know how you worry about things being perfect, and we didn't want you to see it until it was ready. There it was again, my supposed perfectionism being used to justify their secrecy. According to Michael, every questionable thing they'd done was actually motivated by their consideration for my feelings and preferences. I was too worried about perfection to see an unfinished house. I was too fragile to handle the stress of real estate transactions. I was too old and confused to understand financial planning. Michael, I want you to stop lying to me. The words came out harder than I'd intended, carrying decades of accumulated frustration and disappointment. Michael's face went through several expressions: surprise, hurt, anger, before settling on the wounded innocence he'd perfected as a child. Mom, I'm not lying to you. I'm trying to explain a complicated situation that you don't seem to want to understand. Sarah and I have been nothing but grateful for your help, and now you're acting like we're criminals or something. You took $85,000 from my retirement savings under false pretenses. You bought a beach house and hid it from me while continuing to ask for money for emergencies that apparently didn't exist. You've been living a secret life of prosperity while I've been stretching my social security check to send you grocery money. What would you call that, if not criminal? Michael's face flushed red, and for a moment I saw a flash of genuine anger instead of manipulative hurt. We never asked you to send us grocery money. We never asked for anything we didn't really need. And if you were so worried about your retirement savings, maybe you should have said no sometimes instead of expecting us to turn down help you offered. The victim blaming was breathtaking. According to Michael, I was responsible for their financial exploitation of me because I'd been too generous. If I hadn't wanted to be used, I should have been less giving. If I hadn't wanted to be deceived, I should have been more suspicious of my own children. Michael, you called me 3 weeks ago asking for $1,500 for Sarah's car repair. You and Sarah own a beach house worth at least $400,000. Why would you need my social security money for car repairs? The house is an investment, Mom. We can't just sell investments every time we have a cash flow problem. Cash flow problem. I stared at my son, this middle-aged man with his expensive clothes and his luxury car parked outside my building, and tried to understand how he'd become so comfortable with lying to me. When had he started seeing me as so stupid and gullible that he could say anything and expect me to believe it? I want the keys to the house, Michael. What? The question came out as a sharp bark, his careful composure finally cracking. You heard me. I want the keys to the beach house I paid for. If it's really a family gift, if I'm really welcome there, then I should have access to it. Mom, that's not reasonable. We have scheduling issues, and insurance concerns, and I want the keys, Michael. Today. The silence stretched between us, filled with 45 years of his assuming I'd back down from any conflict, and my sudden realization that I didn't have to. He was a guest in my home, asking for my continued financial support, after deceiving me for over a year. I held all the cards in this situation, and for the first time in our adult relationship, I was going to use them. Fine, Michael said finally, his voice tight with suppressed anger. But you're being completely unreasonable about this, and you're going to damage our family relationships over nothing. Over nothing. My retirement savings were nothing. My desire to be treated with honesty and respect was nothing. My right to know how my money was being used was nothing. He left 20 minutes later, after making it clear that he thought I was having some sort of mental breakdown brought on by age and loneliness. The keys to the beach house sat on my coffee table, two small pieces of metal that represented so much more than access to a building. They represented my first successful attempt at setting a boundary with my adult children. They represented my refusal to be gaslit and manipulated any longer. But they also represented the beginning of something I wasn't sure I was ready for, a family war that might end with me losing the only people I had left in the world. That night, I sat in my kitchen and made a list of every financial request my family had made over the past 5 years. I went through old bank statements, old checkbook registers, old receipts. The total was staggering, over $120,000 in gifts and loans, not including the beach house down payment. $120,000 that could have bought me a comfortable retirement, maybe a small condo in a building with working elevators and reliable heat. $120,000 that could have paid for home health care if I needed it, or long-term care insurance, or simply the peace of mind that comes with financial security in old age. Instead, I'd funded a lifestyle for my son and daughter-in-law that was far more comfortable than my own, all while pretending that their constant requests for money were temporary emergencies rather than a permanent pattern of exploitation. And what did I have to show for it? A Christmas dinner canceled by text message. Adult children who called only when they needed money. Grandchildren who barely knew me because their parents were always too busy to visit. I'd bought their tolerance, not their love. And now I was learning that even their tolerance had been expensive and conditional. The next morning, I drove to the beach house. The address was burned into my memory from staring at those real estate documents, and the 2-hour drive from Queens to the Jersey Shore gave me plenty of time to think about what I might find when I got there. The house was beautiful, exactly as gorgeous as it had appeared in the photographs I'd discovered. It sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that someone had maintained with obvious care. The mailbox read, Morrison Family Beach House, in cheerful blue letters that matched the shutters. Morrison Family Beach House. As if I were part of the family that was welcome there. I parked in the gravel driveway and sat for a few minutes, taking in the sight of the property my money had purchased. The mortgage documents had listed the purchase price as $360,000, but with improvements and the ocean view, it was probably worth much more now. This was a substantial asset, the kind of vacation home that represented genuine wealth and financial security. And my son had been calling me 3 weeks ago asking for $1,500 for car repairs. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, and immediately understood why Michael and Sarah had kept this place secret. The house was furnished beautifully, with comfortable sofas and ocean-themed decorations and family photographs covering every surface. But the family in the photographs was Michael and Sarah and the grandchildren. There wasn't a single picture of me, or of Harold, or of the woman whose retirement savings had made this paradise possible. The refrigerator was full of expensive food, organic vegetables, artisanal cheeses, wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The closets were full of beach clothes in various sizes, including outfits for the grandchildren's visits that I was apparently never invited to join. In the master bedroom, I found Sarah's jewelry box, filled with pieces I'd never seen her wear during her rare visits to Queens. I found Michael's collection of expensive whiskey, bottles that cost more than my monthly cable bill. I found evidence everywhere of a life lived in comfort and prosperity, funded by a woman who was clipping coupons and buying generic medications. But the most painful discovery was in the guest room, where I found a folder labeled Mom's Visits. Inside were drafts of emails never sent, planning documents never implemented, evidence that they had occasionally considered inviting me to the beach house I'd paid for. The plans were always incomplete, always abandoned, as if including me in their beach house life was an obligation they couldn't quite bring themselves to fulfill. I sat on the guest room bed, a bed that had been purchased for visits I was never actually invited to make, and cried harder than I'd cried since Harold's funeral. Not just for the money, although losing my retirement savings was devastating. Not just for the deception, although their lies had shattered my trust. I cried for the relationship I'd thought I had with my son, the love I'd thought we shared, the family connection that had apparently been nothing more than a financial arrangement. How do you mourn the loss of a relationship that you're discovering never really existed? I spent 3 hours in that house, walking through rooms decorated with their happiness and prosperity, trying to understand how my own flesh and blood had become so comfortable with exploiting me. Every beautiful detail, the ocean view, the comfortable furniture, the well-stocked kitchen, reminded me that I'd funded their paradise while living in poverty. But somewhere during those 3 hours, my grief began to transform into something else. Something harder and cleaner and more powerful than the self-pity I'd been carrying for years. I was angry. For the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely angry at my son and daughter-in-law, and the anger felt better than the depression and anxiety I'd been living with. Anger was energy. Anger was power. Anger was fuel for change. Before I left the beach house, I did something I'd never done before. I took photographs. Pictures of the rooms I'd unknowingly paid for, the furniture my money had purchased, the luxury my family had been enjoying without me. I photographed the Morrison family beach house, mailbox and the ocean view from the deck and the guest room that had been prepared for visits I was never invited to make. Then I drove home to Queens, and I began to make plans. The confrontation came the following weekend, when Sarah called to ask about Thanksgiving plans. Her voice carried the same false sweetness I'd learned to recognize, but now it sounded different to me, calculated and manipulative rather than caring. "Hi, Mom Margaret. I was just wondering if you'd like to contribute to Thanksgiving dinner this year. We're thinking of doing something really special, maybe ordering from that expensive catering company, and if you could help with the cost." She wanted me to pay for Thanksgiving dinner. After discovering their beach house, after realizing the extent of their deception, she was calling to ask me to fund another family gathering that would be designed around their comfort rather than mine. "Sarah," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "I have something to tell you." "Oh, what's that?" She sounded distracted, probably scrolling through her phone or doing something more interesting than talking to her elderly mother-in-law. "I visited the beach house yesterday." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I thought the call might have dropped. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice no longer sweet but sharp with panic. "You what? Mom Margaret, you can't just. I mean, we didn't know you were planning to. There could have been people there, or insurance issues, or..." "It's a beautiful house, Sarah. I can see why you've been keeping it to yourselves. The ocean view from the master bedroom is spectacular. Look, I can explain about the house. It's not what you think. We were going to tell you, I saw the guest room, Sarah. The one with the folder labeled Mom's Visits. All those plans you made but never followed through on. All those invitations you drafted but never sent." Another silence, this one filled with the sound of Sarah trying to figure out how to spin their documented evidence of excluding me into something that was somehow my fault or for my own good. "Those were just preliminary ideas. We wanted to make sure everything was perfect before we invited you. You know how you are about things being just right." There it was again, my supposed perfectionism being used to justify their exclusion of me. According to Sarah, they'd kept me away from the beach house for my own benefit, because I was too picky to enjoy an imperfect vacation. "Sarah, I want you and Michael to come to dinner tomorrow night. We need to have a conversation about our family's financial arrangements." "What do you mean?" "I mean that things are going to change. The way you've been treating me, the way you've been using me, it's going to stop. Mom Margaret, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but you're starting to worry us. This isn't like you at all. Maybe you should see your doctor, make sure you're feeling okay." The gaslighting was automatic now, so practiced that Sarah probably didn't even realize she was doing it. Anytime I expressed displeasure with their treatment of me, anytime I set a boundary or demanded an explanation, I was suddenly having health issues that required medical attention. My legitimate complaints about their behavior became symptoms of age-related mental decline. "I'm feeling fine, Sarah. Better than I've felt in years, actually. I'll see you both tomorrow at 6 o'clock. We might not be able to make it tomorrow. We have plans, and the kids have activities, and then cancel them. If you want my financial support to continue, you'll be here tomorrow at 6. I hung up before she could respond, and for the second time in a week, the silence that followed felt like victory rather than abandonment. But victory doesn't necessarily feel good when you're fighting a war against the people you love most in the world. I spent that evening preparing for a conversation I'd never imagined having, trying to figure out how to demand basic dignity from the children I'd raised to see me as infinitely giving and endlessly exploitable. There's something uniquely painful about having to teach your own adult children how to treat you with respect. It feels like acknowledging a fundamental failure in the parent-child relationship, a breakdown so complete that the most basic elements of love and consideration have to be negotiated rather than assumed. But I was done assuming. I was done hoping that if I just gave them enough money, enough help, enough endless tolerance of their selfishness, they would eventually treat me like family instead of like an ATM. The next evening, Michael and Sarah arrived at my apartment with the wounded expressions of people who considered themselves victims of my unreasonable demands. They sat on my old sofa with the same barely concealed distaste they always showed for my modest living situation, checking their phones and making it clear that they had better places to be. "So, Mom," Michael said with exaggerated patience, "what did you want to talk about?" I had prepared for this conversation, had written notes and practiced what I wanted to say. But looking at my son and daughter-in-law sitting in my small living room, their expensive clothes and judgmental expressions making it clear how little they thought of my life, I found myself speaking from my heart instead of my notes. "I want to tell you how it feels to discover that your own children have been lying to you for over a year while taking money from your retirement savings." Michael immediately went on the defensive. "Mom, we weren't lying. We just didn't think you needed to know every detail of our financial planning. You bought a beach house with my money and hid it from me while asking for more money for fake emergencies. What would you call that if not lying?" "Those weren't fake emergencies," Sarah interjected. "We really did have car repairs and medical bills and all those other expenses. The beach house was a separate investment decision. An investment decision made with my money, Sarah. Money you took under the pretense of needing help with temporary financial problems." "We never said the help was temporary," Michael argued. "And we never forced you to give us anything. You offered to help, and we accepted your help gratefully." The rewriting of history was breathtaking. According to them, I was the one who had initiated all those financial transfers. I was the one who had insisted on giving them money they'd reluctantly accepted. Their manipulation of my maternal instincts and my fear of losing them was being transformed into my own aggressive generosity that they'd been too polite to refuse. "Michael, 3 weeks ago you called asking for $1,500 for Sarah's car repair while sitting in a beach house I'd unknowingly purchased. How is that not deception? The beach house is tied up in mortgage payments and property taxes. Just because we own real estate doesn't mean we have liquid cash available for every expense." Liquid cash. The term sounded absurd coming from someone who'd built a substantial investment portfolio with money taken from his mother's retirement savings. Michael was talking to me like I was financially naive, as if I couldn't understand the difference between assets and cash flow, when I'd been managing household budgets since before he was born. "Michael, let me ask you something. If I hadn't been sending you money all these years, what would you have done? How would you have managed car repairs and medical bills and down payments?" He looked genuinely puzzled by the question, as if I were asking him to imagine a reality that made no sense. "But you were helping us, Mom. That's what families do. Parents help their children get established and build their lives." "For how long, Michael? At what point does helping you get established become funding your entire lifestyle? At what point do I get to retire from being your financial safety net?" "You're not funding our entire lifestyle," Sarah said defensively. "We both work, we both contribute to our household income. Your help has been appreciated, but it's not like we're completely dependent on you." I pulled out the folder I'd prepared, the one containing bank statements and canceled checks and a detailed accounting of every financial transfer I'd made to them over the past 5 years. $120,000, Sarah. Not including the beach house. In 5 years, you've taken more than my entire annual income from Social Security. The numbers were stark and undeniable, laid out in black and white. Michael and Sarah stared at the documents, and for the first time, I saw something that might have been shame cross their faces. But it was quickly replaced by defensiveness and justification. "We never asked for that much," Michael said. "Those were individual requests spread out over years. It's not like we demanded $120,000 all at once." "Michael, it doesn't matter whether you asked for it all at once or piece by piece. The result is the same. I'm living in poverty while funding your comfortable lifestyle. You're not living in poverty, Mom. You have a nice apartment, you have healthcare, you have everything you need. Everything I need." I looked around my small apartment with its worn furniture and outdated appliances, then thought about their 4-bedroom house and beach property and expensive cars. The contrast was so stark that I couldn't believe they were unable to see it. "Michael, do you know how much money I have in savings right now?" He looked uncomfortable with the question. "Mom, your finances are your private business. We've never asked you to." $8,000. After 40 years of working and saving, after living through Harold's illness and death, after trying to build some security for my old age, I have $8,000 in the bank. Because I gave the rest to you. The silence that followed was heavy with implications none of us wanted to acknowledge. $8,000 wasn't enough to handle a medical emergency, or a major home repair, or any of the financial crises that become more likely as people age. I was one broken hip away from complete financial catastrophe, and my son's response was to ask for more money. "What do you want from us, Mom?" Sarah asked finally, her voice carrying an edge of frustration that suggested I was being unreasonable for raising these concerns. "I want the exploitation to stop. I want you to acknowledge that you've been using me as a bank account rather than treating me as a family member. I want you to understand that I can't keep funding your lifestyle while neglecting my own financial security. We've never asked you to neglect your financial security, Michael said. If you didn't want to help us, you should have said no. There it was again, the victim blaming that made their financial exploitation my fault for being too generous. According to Michael, I was responsible for their pattern of manipulation because I'd been too loving and supportive to set boundaries. Michael, when you call asking for money, you don't present it as an optional favor I can decline. You present it as an emergency that requires immediate help, and you make it clear that refusing would be selfish and unloving. You've trained me to believe that saying no would damage our relationship. That's not fair, Mom. We've never threatened to cut off contact if you didn't give us money. You didn't have to threaten explicitly. The message was clear enough. Give us what we want, or deal with the guilt and anxiety of knowing you've disappointed your family during their time of need. The psychological manipulation had been subtle but effective, built on my natural maternal instincts and my fear of losing the only family I had left after Harold's death. They'd never said, "Give us money or we'll stop loving you," but they'd created a dynamic where my value to them seemed directly correlated with my financial usefulness. What exactly do you want us to do? Sarah asked, her tone suggesting that whatever I was asking would be unreasonable and impossible to fulfill. I want you to stop asking me for money. I want you to acknowledge that the beach house belongs to me as much as it belongs to you, since I paid for it. And I want you to start treating me like a family member instead of like a financial resource. We can't just stop asking for help when we have legitimate financial needs, Michael protested. Families are supposed to support each other. Then let's talk about support, Michael. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you invited me to spend time with you that didn't involve me paying for something? When was the last time you offered to help me with anything? The questions hung in the air, unanswered because we all knew the answers. Michael called when he needed money. Sarah called when Michael's approach had failed and she thought her charm might be more effective. They visited when they wanted something, invited me to family gatherings when they needed me to contribute financially, remembered I existed when they had a problem I could solve with my checkbook. We invite you to holidays, Sarah said weakly. You invite me to holidays I pay for, Sarah. There's a difference between being included in family celebrations and being expected to fund them. Look, Mom, Michael said, his patience finally wearing thin, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this whole attitude is really hurtful. We've always been grateful for your help, and now you're acting like we're criminals or something. Maybe you're feeling lonely, or maybe you're worried about getting older, but taking it out on your family isn't fair. The gaslighting was reaching new levels of sophistication. According to Michael, my objection to being financially exploited was really about loneliness and aging anxiety. My demand for basic respect was a psychological problem rather than a reasonable boundary. My discovery of their deception was a symptom of mental instability rather than evidence of their manipulation. Michael, I'm not taking anything out on anyone. I'm simply stating facts about our family's financial relationships and asking for them to change. But you're not just stating facts, Mom. You're making accusations and creating drama where none existed before. We were all happy with how things were, and now you're stirring up conflict. We were all happy. The statement was so disconnected from my actual experience that I wondered if Michael genuinely believed it, or if he'd become so comfortable with lying that he no longer distinguished between his convenience and my happiness. I wasn't happy, Michael. I've been anxious and depressed and financially insecure for years, constantly worried about how I'd manage if you needed more help than I could afford to give. I've been living in fear of disappointing you, of failing to meet your expectations, of not being useful enough to deserve your attention. That's not happiness. Well, maybe if you'd communicated that instead of just giving us money and then resenting us for accepting it, we could have worked something out, Sarah said, her voice sharp with irritation. Communicate. As if I hadn't tried, over the years, to express my concerns about money, only to be told I was worrying unnecessarily or being selfish or failing to understand their financial pressures. As if I hadn't hinted, suggested, and eventually directly stated that I was struggling to keep up with their requests, only to be told that families help each other and that my reluctance to give was disappointing and hurtful. I did try to communicate, Sarah. But every time I expressed concern about money, you and Michael made it clear that my reluctance to help was a character failing on my part. That's not true, Michael said. We've always told you that your help was appreciated, not required. The lie was so blatant that I almost laughed. Appreciated, not required. Except that their calls always came with deadlines and urgency and emotional pressure that made it clear that refusing would have serious consequences for our relationship. Michael, let me ask you something. If I had said no to your requests for money over the past 5 years, do you honestly believe our relationship would be the same as it is now? He looked uncomfortable with the question, probably because we both knew the answer. If I had consistently refused to fund their lifestyle, their calls would have become less frequent, their visits would have stopped entirely, and their tolerance for my presence in their lives would have evaporated quickly. That's a hypothetical question, Mom. It's not fair to ask me to speculate about things that didn't happen. It's not hypothetical anymore, Michael. Because starting now, I'm saying no. No more emergency loans. No more contributions to family celebrations. No more cash transfers to support your lifestyle while I live on a fixed income. The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses in our conversation. This wasn't the silence of people trying to figure out what to say next. This was the silence of people realizing that a fundamental shift had occurred in their relationship, and that the easy money they'd been counting on was no longer available. Mom, Sarah said finally, her voice careful and measured, I think you're making a mistake. Family relationships aren't about keeping score or demanding quid pro quo. They're about love and support and helping each other through difficult times. Love and support and helping each other. The irony was breathtaking. Sarah was lecturing me about family relationships while sitting in my apartment after a year of hiding a beach house I'd unknowingly purchased, asking me to continue funding their comfort while I struggled with financial insecurity. You're right, Sarah. Family relationships should be about love and support. But what you and Michael have been giving me isn't love. It's tolerance in exchange for money. And I'm not buying it anymore. That's a terrible thing to say, Michael said, his voice carrying genuine hurt for the first time in our conversation. We love you, Mom. We've always loved you. Just because we've accepted your help doesn't mean our love is conditional. Then prove it, Michael. Show me what our relationship looks like when money isn't involved. Call me because you miss me, not because you need something. Visit me because you enjoy spending time with me, not because you want to ask for financial help. Include me in your lives because I'm your mother, not because I can pay for the privilege. We do those things, Sarah protested. We call and visit and include you in family events. When, Sarah? When was the last time you called me without needing anything? When was the last time you invited me somewhere without expecting me to contribute financially? The silence stretched again, filled with the weight of relationships that had been transactional for so long that neither Michael nor Sarah could remember what genuine affection felt like without the expectation of financial benefit. Look, Mom, Michael said finally, I don't think this conversation is productive. You're obviously upset, and maybe we should take some time to cool off before we say things we'll regret. Take some time to cool off. As if my objection to being financially exploited was an emotional overreaction that would pass if I just calmed down and came to my senses. As if demanding basic respect from my adult children was a temporary fit of pique rather than a reasonable boundary that should have been set years ago. Michael, I'm not upset. I'm clear. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly about what's been happening in our family, and I'm setting boundaries that should have existed all along. These aren't boundaries, Mom. This is you creating conflict and drama where none existed before. Creating conflict and drama. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised and supported and sacrificed for, and realized that in his mind, my refusal to continue being exploited was the problem, not their exploitation itself. He genuinely believed that my objection to their financial manipulation was more destructive to our family than the manipulation had been. Michael, I want you to leave now. Both of you. I need time to think about what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward. Mom, don't be like this, Sarah said, her voice switching back to the false sweetness she used when she wanted something. We can work this out. We're family. We're family. The phrase that had been used to manipulate me for so many years, to justify their exploitation and demands, to make me feel guilty for wanting basic consideration and respect. Yes, we are family. And it's time we started acting like one. They left reluctantly, making it clear that they considered my behavior unreasonable and destructive. After they were gone, I sat in my small living room and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, peace. Not happiness exactly, but the absence of the constant anxiety about money that had been my companion for so long. For the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about the next phone call asking for financial help. I didn't have to calculate whether I could afford to send money without compromising my own security. I didn't have to pretend that their financial requests were temporary emergencies rather than permanent expectations. I was free from the exhausting cycle of giving and guilt and never feeling like I'd given enough. But freedom came with a price. 3 days later, my phone stopped ringing. No calls from Michael asking about my health or my day. No texts from Sarah sharing photos of the grandchildren or updates about family activities. Even the frequency of their financial requests had served as a form of communication, a way of staying connected even if the connection was exploitative. Now there was silence. I tried to tell myself that this was temporary, that they just needed time to adjust to the new boundaries I'd set. But as days turned into weeks, I began to understand that I might have lost more than just their financial demands. I might have lost them entirely. The loneliness was crushing. I'd been lonely before, during the years when their calls came only when they needed money, but this was different. This was the silence of people who decided I wasn't useful enough to maintain any relationship with at all. Had I made a mistake? Had I chosen pride over family connection? Was it better to be used than to be completely alone? These questions tormented me during the long Queen's winter, as I sat in my small apartment without the phone calls that had once provided structure to my days, even if that structure had been built on exploitation. I found myself wondering if Michael and Sarah had been right, if I'd created drama and conflict where simple gratitude would have been more appropriate. But then I would remember the beach house, hidden from me while I sent grocery money. I would remember Sarah's jewelry box full of expensive pieces I'd never seen her wear, and Michael's collection of premium whiskey that cost more than my monthly budget for food. I would remember the folder labeled Mom's Visits, filled with invitation plans that were never implemented. And I would remember that what I'd lost wasn't really love. It was tolerance purchased with money, attention rented by the month, family connection that lasted only as long as the bank transfers continued. Still, the silence hurt. Even purchased affection had been better than no affection at all. The breaking point came in March, when I received a text message from Michael that I initially thought was an attempt at reconciliation. "Mom, hope you're doing well. Sarah's pregnant and we're really excited. The doctor says everything looks good so far." For a moment, my heart soared. A new grandchild. A baby who might love me simply and purely, without conditions or expectations. A chance to be useful and needed again, to have a role in my family's life that was meaningful and important. But the second text arrived a few minutes later. The pregnancy is considered high risk because of Sarah's age, and the doctor wants her to see specialists and have extra monitoring. The insurance doesn't cover all of it, and we're looking at about $8,000 in out-of-pocket costs. We hate to ask, but could you help us with this? It's for your grandchild. It's for your grandchild. The manipulation was so transparent, so calculated, that I felt physically sick. They hadn't contacted me to share joyful news about their pregnancy. They'd contacted me to prime me for another financial request, to soften me up with the prospect of a new baby before hitting me with a demand for money. And the amount, $8,000, was almost everything I had left in savings. They were asking me to give them my entire financial safety net to cover medical expenses they could undoubtedly afford from their substantial assets, including the beach house I'd unknowingly purchased. I stared at that text message for an hour, feeling waves of anger and grief and desperate longing crash over me. Part of me wanted to send the money immediately, to buy my way back into their lives with this ultimate sacrifice of my financial security. Part of me wanted to ignore the manipulation and focus on the joy of a new grandchild who might change everything. But I knew better now. I knew that sending money wouldn't earn me genuine inclusion in this pregnancy or in their lives. I knew that my financial contribution wouldn't guarantee me access to the grandchild or a meaningful role in the baby's life. I knew that once this crisis was solved, there would be another crisis, and another, until I had nothing left to give and they had no more use for me. So I did something that felt both empowering and heartbreaking. I wrote back a single sentence. "Congratulations on your pregnancy. I wish you and Sarah and the baby all the best." No offer of money. No promise of financial help. Just genuine good wishes for their growing family, the kind of response that would have been appropriate from any friend or relative who wasn't expected to bankroll their lives. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. No follow-up text thanking me for the congratulations. No phone call to update me on Sarah's doctor visits. No inclusion in pregnancy announcements or baby preparations or any of the excitement that should have surrounded the arrival of a new grandchild. I had failed their test. I had proven that I was no longer useful to them. And so I was discarded completely, cut off from their lives as efficiently as if I had never existed. But something strange happened in the weeks that followed. Instead of feeling devastated by their rejection, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. The constant anxiety about money was gone. The fear of disappointing them with an inadequate response to their latest crisis was gone. The exhausting cycle of giving and guilt and never feeling like I'd given enough was finally broken. For the first time since Harold's death, I began to live for myself instead of for other people's expectations. I started small. I bought fresh flowers for my kitchen table, something I denied myself for years because flowers seemed frivolous when Michael might call with an emergency. I upgraded my cable package to include movie channels, a luxury I'd avoided because entertainment expenses felt selfish when my family had financial needs. I joined a senior center in Astoria and discovered that I enjoyed playing cards with people who asked nothing from me except good company. I took a cooking class at the community center and learned to make dishes for one person instead of always planning meals around potential visits from a family that rarely came. Most importantly, I started therapy with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics and financial abuse. "Mrs. Morrison," she said during our third session, "what you've described isn't unusual, unfortunately. Many older adults find themselves in similar situations with adult children who've learned to see them primarily as financial resources. Financial resources. Hearing the pattern named so clinically was both validating and heartbreaking. I wasn't alone in this experience. I wasn't uniquely foolish or unusually manipulated. I was part of a common phenomenon that happened when love became confused with money and boundaries got lost in the fear of abandonment. The hardest part, my therapist continued, is that breaking these patterns often means accepting that the relationships weren't what you thought they were. When love has been transactional for a long time, removing the transaction sometimes reveals that there wasn't much genuine affection underneath. The words hit me like a physical blow, but they also carried a strange kind of relief. If Michael and Sarah's love for me had been authentic, they wouldn't have abandoned me the moment I stopped bankrolling their lifestyle. If their affection had been real, they would have been calling to check on my well-being during the months since our confrontation, not just disappearing completely when I became financially unavailable. Their silence was proof that I'd made the right decision, even though it had cost me the family relationships I'd thought I was preserving. Summer came, and with it, the knowledge that Sarah would be having the baby soon. I found myself thinking about the grandchild I might never meet, wondering if this little person would grow up hearing stories about a cold, selfish grandmother who'd refused to help during a difficult time. Would they ever know that their beach house had been bought with money from a woman they'd never be allowed to love? But I also began to understand that my worth as a person wasn't dependent on my usefulness to people who'd proven themselves capable of exploiting me. I had value beyond my bank account. I had love to give that didn't require payment plans or financial transactions. I found that love in unexpected places. Mrs. Chen from down the hall knocked on my door one July afternoon, looking embarrassed and holding a casserole dish. "My granddaughter is visiting from California," she said in her accented English, "and she made too much food. Would you like some? It's Chinese chicken with vegetables." It was a simple gesture, but it felt revolutionary after years of family relationships based on what I could provide rather than who I was. Mrs. Chen wasn't asking me for money or expecting me to solve her problems. She was just offering to share something good with a neighbor. We began eating dinner together once a week, taking turns cooking and sharing stories about our lives. Mrs. Chen had fled China during the Cultural Revolution, had raised 3 children while working in a factory, had buried a husband and survived more hardships than I could imagine. But she faced each day with a quiet dignity that inspired me. "Family is important," she told me one evening as we shared homemade dumplings, "but family that hurts you is not really family. Blood relation doesn't give people permission to treat you badly. The wisdom was simple but profound, cutting through all the complicated emotions and guilt I'd been carrying about Michael and Sarah's treatment of me. In August, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I contacted a lawyer about estate planning. Not because I was planning to die anytime soon, but because I wanted to make sure my wishes were clearly documented and legally protected. The lawyer, a patient woman named Jennifer Rodriguez, listened as I explained my situation with Michael and Sarah. I told her about the years of financial exploitation, about the beach house purchased with my money, about their complete disappearance from my life when I stopped sending money. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, "you have several options for protecting your assets and ensuring your wishes are respected. You can establish trusts, create specific bequests, even include provisions that address the money you've already given to your son." We spent 3 hours planning a will and estate structure that reflected my values rather than my family's expectations. If Michael and Sarah wanted to inherit from me, they would have to acknowledge the financial gifts I'd already provided and demonstrate some genuine interest in my well-being that wasn't tied to money. It felt good to take control of my financial legacy instead of assuming that the people who'd exploited me in life deserved to benefit from my death. September brought news that reached me through the neighborhood gossip network. Sarah had given birth to a healthy baby girl. Mrs. Chen mentioned it casually during one of our dinners, having heard it from her daughter who'd seen something on social media. I felt the expected pang of grief, a granddaughter I might never meet, another generation of family I was excluded from, but it was different this time. Less devastating and more wistful, like mourning something that had never really belonged to me anyway. 2 weeks later, I received a birth announcement in the mail. Not a personal note or phone call, but a formal printed announcement that had probably been sent to everyone in their address book. Michael and Sarah Morrison are pleased to announce the arrival of their daughter, Emma Rose Morrison, born September 15th. Emma Rose. A beautiful name for what I was sure was a beautiful baby. The announcement included a professional photograph of the tiny girl, and looking at her perfect features, I felt love flood through me so powerfully it took my breath away. But along with the love came clarity. This child would grow up in the same family system that had produced Michael's sense of entitlement and Sarah's manipulative charm. She would learn that love was transactional, that older adults were financial resources, that family relationships were measured in dollars rather than affection. Unless someone broke the pattern. I wrote Michael and Sarah a letter that took me 3 days to compose. In it, I congratulated them on Emma Rose's birth and shared my hopes for her future. I wrote about the kind of grandmother I wanted to be, someone who could offer love and wisdom without expecting financial reciprocity, someone who could model healthy boundaries and authentic relationships. But I also made it clear that if they wanted me to be part of Emma Rose's life, our family dynamic would have to change fundamentally. No more financial requests. No more manipulation disguised as emergencies. No more tolerance purchased with money transfers. I wanted to love my granddaughter freely and be loved in return, without the complications of financial exploitation that had poisoned my relationships with her parents. I sent the letter and waited. Weeks passed without a response. Then months. Christmas came and went without acknowledgement. My birthday passed unnoticed. Emma Rose turned 6 months old, and I had never seen her except in that one professional photograph from the birth announcement. But something had shifted in me during those months of silence. The grief was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. The loneliness was real, but it was no longer desperate. I had built a life that didn't depend on other people's approval or conditional love. I had friends at the senior center who enjoyed my company without expecting anything from me. I had neighbors like Mrs. Chen who shared meals and conversation based on mutual respect rather than financial transactions. I had hobbies and interests that brought me joy without requiring anyone else's participation. Most importantly, I had self-respect. For the first time in years, I liked the person I saw in the mirror. Not because I was useful to others, not because I was generous with my money, but because I had learned to value myself appropriately and demand treatment that reflected that value. The transformation wasn't complete. I still felt pangs of loss when I thought about the grandchildren I was missing, still wondered sometimes if I'd been too harsh in setting boundaries, but I no longer doubted that I'd made the right choice. Being alone with dignity was better than being used without respect. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came an unexpected visitor. I was tending the small herb garden I'd started on my fire escape when the building buzzer announced someone downstairs wanting to see me. "Mrs. Morrison?" The voice through the intercom was young and unfamiliar. "My name is Emma Chen. I'm Mrs. Chen's granddaughter from California. She's told me so much about you, and I wondered if I could come up and say hello." Emma Chen, not my granddaughter Emma Rose, but another Emma entirely, a 25-year-old graduate student who'd come to New York to visit her grandmother and had heard stories about the kind lady from 4B who shared dinners and conversation. I buzzed her up, and when she knocked on my door, I found myself looking at a bright, energetic young woman who hugged me like I was her own grandmother. "Nai talks about you all the time," she said, using the Chinese word for grandmother that Mrs. Chen had taught me. "She says you're the sister she never had, and that your friendship has made her so happy since her husband died." Sister she never had. The phrase warmed me in ways I hadn't expected. Mrs. Chen and I had found family in each other, built relationships based on mutual care and respect rather than blood obligation or financial benefit. Emma Chen stayed for 2 hours, asking about my life and sharing stories about her graduate studies and social work. She was researching family dynamics and elder care, and she was fascinated by my experience with financial exploitation and boundary setting. "What you did takes incredible courage," she said as she prepared to leave. "Most people in your situation never break free from those patterns. They just keep giving and hoping and being disappointed until there's nothing left." Incredible courage. I'd never thought of my decisions in those terms, but Emma Chen was right. It had taken courage to confront Michael and Sarah, to demand respect, to choose dignity over the desperate hope for love. It had taken courage to build a new life that didn't revolve around other people's needs and expectations. As summer approached, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I was going to take a vacation. Not a family visit where I paid for everyone's meals and accommodations, not an obligation disguised as pleasure, but a genuine vacation just for me. I had enough money saved. Careful budgeting and freedom from family financial requests had allowed me to rebuild my small emergency fund, to spend a week at a modest bed and breakfast on Cape Cod. Nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable, with an ocean view and walking distance to shops and restaurants. The week in Cape Cod was a revelation. I watched sunrises from my room's small balcony, took long walks on the beach, read books in seaside cafes, and talked to fellow travelers who knew nothing about my family drama and liked me just for being good company. On my last day, I visited a small gallery featuring local artists, and I found myself staring at a painting of a woman sitting on a beach, her face turned toward the sun, her expression peaceful and self-contained. The artist had captured something I recognized, the look of someone who had found contentment within herself rather than in other people's approval. I bought the painting and hung it in my kitchen when I returned to Queens, a daily reminder that happiness didn't require anyone else's participation or permission. That fall, something unexpected happened. Michael called. Not Sarah, not a text message, but Michael himself, his voice carrying an unfamiliar uncertainty. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing?" The question seemed genuine rather than perfunctory, but I was cautious in my response. I'm doing well, Michael. How are you and Sarah and the baby? We're okay. Emma Rose is getting bigger, starting to crawl and getting into everything. Sarah's adjusting to being home with her, and I'm still working too much, but that's nothing new. Normal conversation. No immediate request for money, no crisis that required my intervention. I waited, wondering what had prompted this unexpected call. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation last year, about the things you said about feeling used and unappreciated. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. I talked to a counselor about some family stuff, and she helped me understand. I think maybe I didn't realize how much we were asking of you, financially, or how it was affecting you. I thought you were happy to help, and I didn't consider that you might be sacrificing your own security to support us. A counselor. The revelation surprised me. Michael had never been particularly interested in therapy or self-reflection, but something had prompted him to seek professional guidance about our relationship. What made you decide to talk to someone? I asked. Honestly? I was angry at first, about the way you'd cut us off and demanded the keys to the beach house. I thought you were being unreasonable and manipulative. But the anger started to fade after a few months, and I began missing you. Missing our phone calls, even if they usually involved me asking for money. He paused, and I heard him take a deep breath before continuing. The counselor asked me to imagine how I'd feel if Emma Rose treated me the way I'd been treating you. If she only called when she needed money, if she hid major purchases from me while asking for grocery money, if she disappeared from my life the moment I couldn't give her what she wanted financially. The role reversal was powerful, and I could hear in Michael's voice that it had affected him deeply. I realized I would be heartbroken if Emma Rose treated me like a bank account instead of like her father. And I started to understand that's what I'd been doing to you. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from my son, and it was more thoughtful and self-aware than anything I'd expected. But I'd learned to be cautious about dramatic declarations that weren't backed up by changed behavior. I appreciate you telling me this, Michael. What are you hoping to change going forward? I want to rebuild our relationship on a different foundation. I want to include you in our lives because you're my mother and Emma Rose's grandmother, not because we need something from you. I want you to know Emma Rose and to be part of her life in a meaningful way. The offer was everything I'd dreamed of hearing for years, but I was surprised to discover that my response was more measured than desperate. The months of independence and self-respect had changed me in ways I was still discovering. That sounds wonderful, Michael. But I need you to understand that the financial patterns we had before can never happen again. I can't support your lifestyle while neglecting my own security, and I won't tolerate being treated like an ATM disguised as a family member. I understand, Mom. And I'm not asking for money or expecting you to contribute to our expenses. I'm asking if you'd like to come to dinner next Sunday to meet Emma Rose and spend some time with us. Dinner next Sunday. A simple invitation with no strings attached, no expectations beyond showing up and being grandmotherly. It was what I'd wanted all along, but now I found myself evaluating the offer carefully rather than accepting it immediately and gratefully. Will this be a genuine family dinner, Michael? Or will it turn into a discussion of your latest financial challenges that I might be able to help with? It will be a genuine family dinner, Mom. Sarah has been doing some thinking too, and we both want to try to build a healthier relationship with you. We miss having you in our lives. Miss having you in our lives. The words were healing, but I was determined not to let my desire for family connection override the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. I'd like that, Michael. But I want to be clear, if this dinner turns into a subtle request for money or any kind of financial discussion, I'll leave. I won't participate in the old patterns anymore. I understand, and that's not what this is. We genuinely want you to meet Emma Rose and be part of our family again. I agreed to the dinner, but I spent the week leading up to it in a strange mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Part of me was thrilled at the prospect of finally meeting my granddaughter and potentially rebuilding relationships with Michael and Sarah. But part of me was terrified of falling back into old patterns, of being manipulated by my own desperate desire for family connection. Sunday arrived, and I found myself standing on the front porch of Michael and Sarah's house in Westchester, holding a small gift for Emma Rose and wondering if I was making a mistake. Everything looked the same, the 4-bedroom colonial, the carefully maintained lawn, the 3-car garage that represented prosperity I'd unknowingly helped fund. But when Michael opened the door, something was different in his expression. Less calculating, more genuinely welcoming. And when Sarah appeared behind him, carrying a beautiful baby girl with dark hair and bright eyes, I felt my carefully constructed emotional defenses crumble. Mom, this is Emma Rose, Michael said softly. Emma Rose, this is your grandmother. The baby looked at me with the curious intensity that infants bring to new faces, and when I held out my finger, she grasped it with surprising strength. In that moment, I understood that whatever mistakes had been made, whatever exploitation had occurred, this child was innocent and deserving of love that didn't come with conditions or expectations. The dinner was different from any family gathering we'd shared in years. We talked about Emma Rose's development, about my recent vacation to Cape Cod, about Michael's work and Sarah's adjustment to motherhood. No one mentioned money. No one hinted at financial difficulties or upcoming expenses that might require assistance. Instead, Sarah showed me the baby's nursery and asked for advice about sleep schedules and feeding routines. Michael shared photos from Emma Rose's first months and asked about my own memories of his infancy. We talked like family members who genuinely cared about each other's lives rather than like people negotiating a business transaction. When I held Emma Rose for the first time, she fell asleep in my arms, and I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since Harold's death. This was what I'd been searching for all along, not the desperate gratification of being needed financially, but the simple joy of being loved and welcomed as a grandmother. As the evening wound down, Michael walked me to my car, and I braced myself for the financial request I feared was coming. Instead, he hugged me and said quietly, "Thank you for not giving up on us completely, Mom. I know we had a lot to make up for, and I'm grateful you're giving us this chance. Thank you for not giving up." The gratitude was genuine, and for the first time in our adult relationship, I felt like Michael saw me as a person rather than as a resource. The rebuilding process wasn't immediate or easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight, and I found myself second-guessing every interaction, looking for signs that the old patterns were reasserting themselves. But slowly, over months of regular Sunday dinners and phone calls that didn't involve requests for money, I began to believe that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. Sarah, who had never shown much interest in my opinions or experiences, began asking about my childhood during the Depression, about my marriage to Harold, about the challenges I'd faced as a young mother. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding me as a person rather than just tolerating me as Michael's mother. Most importantly, they began including me in decisions about Emma Rose's care and upbringing. I was asked for advice about childproofing, consulted about feeding schedules, invited to accompany them to pediatrician appointments. For the first time, I felt like a valued grandmother rather than a wealthy benefactor. The beach house remained a complicated issue. My name was still not on the deed, and legally, I had no claim to property I'd unknowingly financed. But Michael and Sarah began inviting me to spend weekends there, and during those visits, I finally got to enjoy the ocean views and comfortable accommodations my money had purchased. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was acknowledgement, and it allowed me to make peace with the financial exploitation I'd endured. The beach house had cost me my retirement security, but it was also the crisis that had forced us all to confront the unhealthy dynamics in our family relationships. A year after that first dinner, Emma Rose took her first steps, directly into my arms. I was babysitting while Michael and Sarah attended a work function, and when she let go of the coffee table and toddled those first unsteady steps toward me, I felt a joy so pure it brought tears to my eyes. This was what I'd been searching for through all those years of financial manipulation and emotional exploitation. Not the desperate gratification of being needed as a wallet, but the simple happiness of being loved by a child who ran to me because she was happy to see me, not because I might give her something. The experience taught me that real family relationships don't require payment plans or financial transactions. They're built on mutual affection, respect, and genuine interest in each other's well-being. The love I'd been trying to purchase with bank transfers had been available all along, but only after I learned to value myself enough to demand authentic relationships. Emma Rose is 3 years old now, and she calls me Grandma Maggie in a voice that melts my heart every time I hear it. She spends one weekend a month at my Queens apartment, and we've developed our own traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, afternoon walks to the park, bedtime stories about her daddy when he was a little boy. During these weekends, she doesn't care that my apartment is small or that my furniture is old. She doesn't know that I once chose dignity over desperation, boundaries over financial exploitation. To her, I'm just Grandma Maggie, who makes funny faces and reads stories in different voices and always has time to play whatever game she invents. Michael and Sarah have kept their word about rebuilding our relationship on a healthier foundation. They've never asked me for money since that first dinner 2 years ago. When they face financial challenges, a roof repair, unexpected medical bills, car problems, they handle them without expecting me to provide solutions. They've learned to see me as a family member rather than as a financial resource. The transformation wasn't just theirs, though. I had to learn new patterns too, had to resist the impulse to offer money as a way of showing love or maintaining connection. When Emma Rose admired an expensive toy at the store, I had to stop myself from buying it immediately and instead think about whether it was appropriate and within my budget. When Michael mentioned work stress, I had to avoid offering financial solutions and instead provide emotional support. Learning to love without paying for the privilege was harder than I'd expected, but it was also more rewarding. The relationships I built through authentic care and attention were deeper and more satisfying than the tolerance I'd purchased with bank transfers. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep last spring, and at her funeral, I met dozens of people whose lives she'd touched through simple kindness rather than financial generosity. Her granddaughter Emma spoke about her grandmother's wisdom, that the most valuable gifts we can give each other cost nothing but mean everything. That wisdom has guided me as I've built new friendships and strengthened family relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial transactions. I volunteer at a literacy program for seniors, serve on the building's tenant council, and have even started dating a widower I met at the community center. At 74, I'm discovering that life can be rich and fulfilling even when, especially when, it's not built around other people's financial needs. The money I once gave Michael and Sarah hasn't been returned, and legally, I have no claim to the assets they built with my retirement savings. But I've made peace with those losses because they led to something more valuable: self-respect and authentic relationships. Sometimes I think about the woman I was 3 years ago, desperately sending money to adult children who saw me primarily as a financial resource, accepting crumbs of attention in exchange for substantial sacrifices of my security. That woman was generous and loving, but she didn't understand that real love doesn't require payment plans. The woman I am now knows that I deserve relationships that don't cost me anything except emotional investment. I deserve family members who call because they miss me, not because they need something. I deserve to be valued for who I am rather than for what I can provide. Emma Rose will grow up understanding these truths in ways that her parents didn't, because she's seeing them modeled in our family relationships. She'll learn that love is freely given and freely received, that respect is the foundation of healthy relationships, and that older adults deserve dignity and consideration rather than exploitation. Maybe that's the most important legacy I can leave, not a financial inheritance that might be frittered away on beach houses and luxury cars, but the example of a woman who learned to value herself appropriately and demand treatment that reflected that value. The beach house still stands on the Jersey shore, and I still visit it occasionally when Michael and Sarah invite me. But now when I sit on that porch watching the sunset over the Atlantic, I don't think about the retirement savings it cost me. Instead, I think about the hard-won wisdom that came from learning to choose dignity over desperation. The view is beautiful, but the lesson has been priceless. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where your generosity was mistaken for weakness, where your love was measured in dollar signs rather than genuine affection? Have you ever had to choose between being used and being alone? If this story resonates with you, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps me continue opening my heart and sharing these difficult but important truths. And if you found value in this journey from exploitation to empowerment, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones we never thought we'd have the courage to tell.